I always thought I had a good marriage. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but solid. My name's Daniel, and I've been married to Emily for 11 years. We met in college, built a life together, and had a son, Liam, who's turning 8 next month. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and our moments of quiet companionship. I thought that was enough. Lately, though, things had been feeling off. Not in any dramatic, earth-shattering way, just little things. Emily had always been affectionate, the kind of woman who'd rest her hand on my knee while we watched TV or squeeze my fingers 3 times to silently say I love you. But over the past few months, that quiet tenderness had faded. Her touches became absent-minded, her kisses quick and perfunctory. When I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off: work stress, hormones, the usual excuses. I told myself not to overthink it. Marriages go through phases. Maybe I just needed to be more present, more engaged. So I tried. I made dinner more often, picked up her favorite coffee on my way home, and even suggested a weekend getaway, just the 2 of us. She smiled, thanked me, but never seemed truly there. Then, about 3 weeks ago, I noticed something strange. It started with her phone. Emily had always been pretty casual about her phone usage. She'd leave it lying around, never bothered with passwords, and we often used each other's devices without thinking. But suddenly, her phone was always face down on the counter. At night, she used to charge it by the bedside table, now it was plugged in downstairs. And she had a new habit: whenever I walked into the room while she was on it, she'd tilt the screen away, just slightly. It wasn't much. Probably nothing. But it planted a seed of doubt. The next thing was her schedule. Emily worked in marketing and often had late meetings, but she'd always text if she was running behind. Lately, she'd been vague about her whereabouts, saying things like, "It was just a long day" or "Traffic was awful." Last Thursday, she came home 2 hours late with no explanation. Her clothes smelled like expensive cologne, not mine. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was imagining things. Then, I found the earring. Emily had gone out for drinks with her co-workers that night, and after she fell asleep, I went to grab my phone charger from the car. That's when I saw it, on the passenger seat, glinting under the dome light. A single, silver hoop earring. Emily doesn't wear hoops. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. I turned it over in my fingers, my heart pounding harder with every second. There was only one explanation. Someone else had been in her car. My mind raced through the possibilities, grasping for any innocent reason. A coworker she'd given a ride home? Maybe. A friend? Unlikely. I could have woken her up and asked right then. I could have confronted her with the earring in my palm, demanding answers. But something in me resisted. I needed to be sure. So I put the earring back exactly where I found it and walked inside, feeling the first crack in the foundation of my marriage widen into something terrifying. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. The earring sat in my mind like a ticking bomb, counting down the seconds until everything exploded. I didn't confront Emily right away. Not because I was afraid, I wasn't even sure how I felt yet, but because I needed more than a single piece of jewelry in her car to confirm my worst fear. If I accused her without real proof, she'd have a dozen excuses lined up. "Oh, I gave a coworker a ride home, she must have dropped it." "You're being ridiculous, Daniel. Do you even hear yourself right now?" I had to be sure. So I started paying attention. Emily wasn't careless, not in the way cheaters in movies are. There were no lipstick stains on collars, no unexplained weekend trips, no new lingerie suddenly appearing in our dresser. But I knew my wife. I knew the small shifts, the quiet changes, the way love either settled deeper or started to erode. And what I saw now was a woman who was slipping away from me, little by little. It was in the way she laughed, not with me, but at her phone. It was in the way she got dressed in the morning, taking an extra few minutes to check her reflection, smoothing her skirt, biting her lip in concentration like she was thinking of someone who wasn't me. It was in the way she hesitated before kissing me, like something inside her was telling her it wasn't right anymore. Then there were the late nights. At first, they were spaced out enough that they didn't raise alarms, one here, another there. But by the time I found that earring, they had become routine. She had meetings or last-minute work emergencies at least twice a week, always leaving before dinner, always coming home after Liam was in bed. I decided to test her. That Monday, when she came home late, I made a casual remark. "Long day, huh?" She barely looked at me as she dropped her purse on the counter. "Yeah. Got stuck talking to clients after work." "Oh?" I leaned against the counter. "Who?" Emily paused. It was just a flicker of hesitation, but I caught it. "Just some new accounts. You wouldn't know them." She turned away quickly, heading to the fridge for a bottle of water. It was a small thing, but it sent a chill through me. When had my wife ever been secretive about work? She used to tell me everything, too much, even. I'd listened to endless stories about office drama, co-workers' breakups, her boss's weird habits. Now she didn't even want to give me a name? I needed more. The next day, I went through her car. I waited until she was in the shower, grabbed her keys, and slipped outside. My hands were shaking, though I didn't know if it was from fear or adrenaline. I checked the glove compartment first. Nothing but her insurance papers and a few receipts. Then I moved to the center console. Tucked between some napkins, I found a crumpled parking stub. It was for a hotel downtown. I stared at it for a long time. My stomach felt hollow. It was dated last Friday, the night she'd gone out for drinks with coworkers. I sat there, gripping the piece of paper like it might change if I looked at it long enough. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she had gone there to meet a friend, or... No. I had been blind long enough. The breaking point. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for more clues to fall into my lap. I was going to catch her in the act. Emily said she had another late night coming up Thursday. She told me she'd be home around 10, maybe later. I played it cool. I kissed her on the cheek, told her I'd put Liam to bed, and said, "Don't work too hard." Then, as soon as she left, I followed her. It felt insane. Like something out of a bad movie. But as I drove a few cars behind her, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, I knew I was doing the right thing. She didn't go to her office. She didn't go anywhere near her office. Instead, she drove straight to the same hotel from the parking stub. I parked across the street, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For a moment, I told myself I could leave. I didn't have to see this. I could turn the car around, go home, pretend I never saw the signs, live in denial a little longer. But I wasn't that kind of man. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then, a man appeared. He stepped out of the hotel entrance, glancing up and down the street before pulling out his phone. A moment later, Emily walked out. She smiled when she saw him. That smile, it shattered something inside me. It wasn't the polite, distracted smile she gave me these days. It wasn't the half-hearted one she forced when she said goodnight. It was real. Warm. The kind of smile a woman gives a man she's excited to see. He leaned in, whispered something in her ear. She laughed. Then they kissed. Not a peck. Not a hesitation. A deep, slow kiss. I felt my entire body go numb. Everything falls apart. I didn't remember the drive home. I barely remembered getting inside, locking the door behind me, or sitting on the couch staring at the wall for what felt like hours. All I knew was that my marriage was over. Emily came home around midnight. I watched her walk through the door, pretending everything was fine, pretending she hadn't just spent hours with another man. She kissed my cheek. I didn't flinch. "Hey," she said softly, brushing her fingers through my hair. "You okay?" I stared at her. This woman I had built a life with. The mother of my son. The person I had trusted more than anyone. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready. Not yet. So I let her lie to me one more time. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Emily smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months, her body leaning into his, their lips meeting like they had all the time in the world. I turned my head to look at her. She was fast asleep, curled up on her side, completely unaware that I knew. How long had she been doing this? Had she felt even an ounce of guilt when she came home to me, kissed me, laughed with our son? Or had she already moved on, leaving me behind while pretending everything was fine? By the time the sun rose, I had my answer. She wasn't sorry. Because she didn't think she'd been caught. The plan. I wasn't going to explode. I wanted to rip the covers off her, demand she admit what she did, watch her squirm under the weight of her own lies. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. She'd deny it. Make excuses. Try to manipulate me into second-guessing myself. No. If I was going to confront her, I needed her cornered. I needed her to have no way out. So I planned. I called into work and said I needed a personal day. I took Liam to school like normal, kissed his forehead, and told him I'd pick him up later. Then I drove back home, sat at the kitchen table, and started digging. I went through our phone records first. Emily thought she was smart, but I was smarter. She had been careful, deleting texts, hiding calls, but she couldn't erase the records. There it was. The same number, over and over. Late at night. Early in the morning. Even when we were supposed to be watching a movie together, she had been texting him. I took screenshots. Saved them. Then, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I followed my wife again. I needed to catch her in the act. The moment of truth. Emily had another late meeting scheduled. It was almost laughable how predictable she had become. I told her I'd be home making dinner, kissed her on the cheek, and watched her drive off. Then I followed. She didn't go to her office. Of course not. She drove to the same goddamn hotel. I parked across the street and waited. 15 minutes later, the same man walked up to her car. This time, I got a good look at him. Tall. Dark hair. Mid-30s. He wasn't some stranger, he looked vaguely familiar. Then it clicked. I had met him before. He was at her company Christmas party last year. She introduced him as Ryan, a work friend. I even shook his damn hand. My stomach churned. I grabbed my phone, switched it to video, and hit record. Ryan leaned into Emily's car, kissed her, whispered something that made her laugh. Then they walked inside together. Hand in hand. I had all the proof I needed. The confrontation. I went home and waited. She came back around midnight, slipping off her shoes by the door like she always did. She didn't expect me to be awake, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey. Hey, she said, forcing a smile. Still up? I looked at her. Just looked at her. I wanted to remember this moment. The moment before her world collapsed. Where were you? I asked, my voice calm. She blinked. What? I asked where you were. Emily hesitated. That half-second of silence before she spoke told me everything. Dan, I told you, I had a meeting. A meeting? I took a slow sip of my drink. At a hotel? Her whole body stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and played the video. Her face drained of color. The sound of her own laugh filled the room. Ryan's hand in hers. The kiss. The way she looked at him, like he was her whole world. I didn't say a word. I just watched her. Emily took a shaky step back, shaking her head. It's not Dan, I can explain. I exhaled slowly, placing my glass down. Go ahead. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I waited. She had nothing. Say something, I pressed. Tell me why you've been lying to me. Tell me how long this has been going on. Her hands clenched into fists. It's not what it looks like. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not what it looks like. I repeated. Emily, I have video of you walking into a hotel with another man. How exactly does that look? She was shaking now. I didn't mean for this to happen. Oh, so you tripped and fell onto his dick? Is that how it happened? Her eyes snapped up, filled with anger. Not guilt. Anger. And that's when I knew. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was only mad that she got caught. I had wasted 11 years on this woman. I was going to tell you, she said finally, voice trembling. When? I shot back. Before or after you screwed him again? Emily crossed her arms, her whole body tense. I'm not going to stand here and let you attack me. Attack you? My voice rose. You tore our family apart, Emily. You looked me in the eye, kissed me, slept next to me, and still did this. And you want to act like you're the victim? She flinched. I didn't care. This isn't fair, she muttered. I clenched my jaw. You know what's not fair? Me being faithful to a woman who's been fucking someone else behind my back. She let out a heavy breath, rubbing her temples. It's not that simple. I scoffed. No, Emily. It really is. Silence stretched between us. Then she looked at me, and her expression changed. The tears disappeared. The guilt vanished. And I saw it the moment she decided to turn this around on me. You weren't there for me, she said. I felt something snap inside me. There it was. The excuse. I had been working. Providing. Loving her. Being a father to our son. And it wasn't enough. I stood up, gripping my phone, my heart pounding. I want a divorce. Her mouth dropped open. Dan. No, I shook my head. You don't get to talk your way out of this. You don't get to gaslight me. You cheated. You destroyed our marriage. I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. She looked stunned, like she actually thought she could manipulate her way out of this. But I was done. Without another word, I walked upstairs, leaving her standing there. I barely slept that night. Even after I stormed upstairs and slammed the bedroom door, my mind wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. The way she looked at him. The way she kissed him. The way she used to kiss me. Emily had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. And when she finally got caught, she didn't even try to fix it. She blamed me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched. My body was exhausted, but my mind was wide awake, running through 1,000 different ways to handle this. Should I expose her? Humiliate her in front of her family and friends? Should I make sure everyone knew the truth? Or should I just pack my bags and leave, cutting her out of my life for good? I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to break her the way she had broken me. But then, I thought about Liam. The innocent one. He didn't know. His world was still whole. He still had 2 parents, a home, a sense of normalcy. He didn't deserve to have his life ripped apart because his mother decided to destroy our family. That's what stopped me from going nuclear right away. I had to think. Plan. Be smart. Emily had already thrown away our marriage. Now it was my turn to decide how this ended. The morning after. I heard Emily moving around early the next morning. Normally, she slept in on Saturdays, but today, she was up before me. Nervous. Anxious. Afraid of what I'd do next. Good. When I finally got up, I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up as I walked in, eyes red-rimmed from either guilt or exhaustion. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "We need to talk." I let out a slow breath, grabbed my own cup of coffee, and sat across from her. "All right. Let's talk." She hesitated. I don't know where to start." I let out a cold laugh. "How about with an apology?" Her jaw tightened. That was it, the moment I knew she wasn't truly sorry. If she had been, she would have begged for forgiveness. She would have broken down, admitted everything, done whatever it took to fix the damage. Instead, she was still trying to control the narrative. "I never meant for it to happen," she said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Yeah? Walk me through it, Emily. How exactly does a woman accidentally cheat on her husband?" Her eyes flickered with something anger. "Because I wasn't playing my part. I wasn't the devastated, broken husband who would cry and beg her to stay. I was cold. Controlled. A threat." She licked her lips. "Things between us haven't been good for a while." "Oh, here we go." I rolled my eyes. "I should have seen this coming. This is the part where you try to make it my fault." Her voice sharpened. "I'm not saying it's your fault, Daniel, but you have to admit things between us have been strained for a long time." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "So your solution was to fuck someone else?" She flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Emily?" I snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, you were sneaking around, lying to my face, and meeting him at hotels while I was at home raising our son." She stared at me, breathing hard. I felt alone. The words hit me like a slap. Alone? Alone? I had given this woman everything. I worked, I supported her, I took care of Liam when she stayed late for work, or at least when I thought she was at work. I had been faithful, committed, devoted. And she had the audacity to say she felt alone? I pushed back my chair and stood. "You're unbelievable," I muttered. She stood too, her eyes flashing. "Dan, I'm trying to be honest with you." "No," I said, voice dangerously low. "You're trying to justify what you did. There's a difference." Silence. Her lips pressed together, like she wanted to argue, but for once, she didn't have an excuse. I shook my head. "I'm filing for divorce." Her eyes widened. "Wait, Dan, can't we talk about this?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, now you want to talk?" I gestured between us. "You had months to talk to me, Emily. Instead, you chose to sleep with someone else. I'm done." She reached for me, desperation in her eyes. "Please. Let's just take some time. Think about this." I stepped back. "I already have." Her shoulders slumped. She knew she had lost. But instead of breaking down, instead of fighting for me, she just whispered, "What about Liam?" I clenched my jaw. She was using him now. Trying to make me feel guilty. "I'm not taking him away from you," I said, voice steady. "But we're done, Emily. I'll talk to a lawyer this week and figure out custody." She exhaled shakily, then nodded. That was it. No real apology. No begging me to stay. Just acceptance. She had made her choice. And now, so had I. The final move. I didn't drag it out. By Monday, I had a lawyer. By Wednesday, the divorce papers were ready. By Friday, I moved out. Emily didn't fight me on anything. It was like she had been waiting for this. Maybe she thought she was starting over, that she'd get to build a new life with Ryan. But that dream shattered quickly. 2 weeks later, I got a call from her. She sounded broken. "Dan," she said quietly, "I just thought you should know. Ryan left me." I closed my eyes, exhaling through my nose. Of course he did. These things never last. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was the first time she had actually said it. But it was too late. I'm not, I said, then hung up. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to ruin her life. Because she had already done that herself. The day finally arrived. 3 months had passed since I moved out. 3 months since I stopped waking up next to Emily. 3 months since I started learning how to live life without the woman I had spent over a decade loving. I wish I could say it got easier. Some days, I felt like I was moving forward, like I could finally breathe again. Other days, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me, the betrayal, the anger, the sheer exhaustion of rebuilding my life from scratch. The divorce was nearly finalized. All that was left was to meet one last time, sign the final paperwork, and officially end everything. I told myself it would be simple. Get in. Sign the papers. Get out. But when I walked into the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, I knew nothing about this was going to be simple. Emily was already there, sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked different. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She wasn't dressed like the woman who used to carefully pick out her outfits before leaving the house. There was no polished perfection today, just Emily. She looked up when she saw me, and for the first time in a long time, there was something raw in her eyes. Something that almost resembled regret. I took a deep breath and walked over. An uneasy start. Hey, she said softly as I sat down. I nodded. Emily. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Thanks for meeting me. I wasn't going to, I admitted. Her lips pressed together. I know. I pulled out the paperwork and placed it on the table. Let's not drag this out. She hesitated. And that's when I knew she didn't just call me here to sign papers. She had something to say. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. What is it? She looked down at her coffee, her nails tapping against the ceramic. I wanted to see you. I exhaled through my nose. Why? She lifted her gaze, and for the first time in months, she looked vulnerable. Because, she said quietly, this is the last time we'll ever sit across from each other like this. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. I clenched my jaw. I should have felt satisfaction. She had destroyed our marriage. Lied. Cheated. Ruined everything. She didn't get to be the sad one here. But the worst part? Some small, buried part of me still recognized her. Still remembered the girl I fell in love with. And that was the part one wanted to kill. I inhaled sharply. You weren't ready to end this, but you were ready to sleep with someone else? She flinched. Dan. No, I cut in, my voice sharp. You don't get to sit here and act like this is hard for you. You made this decision months ago. Her eyes glistened. I didn't, she swallowed. I didn't think it would end like this. I laughed. Actually laughed. How did you think it would end, Emily? I shook my head. You thought you could keep sneaking around? That I'd never find out? She looked away. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Did you even think about what you were doing? About how much you were going to hurt me? Or did you just not care? Her breathing hitched. I cared. I scoffed. Yeah. You cared so much that you fucked another man behind my back. She winced. I deserve that. No, I said coldly. You deserve worse. A tear slipped down her cheek. And I felt nothing. The truth she never told me. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I stiffened. Tell me what? She hesitated. And then she said something that knocked the air from my lungs. I ended it before you found out. Silence. My mind froze. I stared at her. What? Emily wiped her cheek, swallowing hard. Ryan. I ended it before you confronted me. I couldn't process the words. I blinked. Bullshit. I swear to you. She shook her head, looking down. It had already ended. I felt sick. Because I believed her. And somehow, that made everything worse. She could have told me. She could have come to me, confessed, begged for forgiveness. But instead, she let me catch her. She let me be the one to tear everything apart. I exhaled sharply. Why are you telling me this now? Emily hesitated. Because I need you to know. I never wanted to lose you. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't want to lose me, but you sure as hell didn't want to keep me either. Her lips parted. And for the first time, she had no excuse. Closure. I glanced at the papers on the table. Sign them. She looked at me for a long time. Then, with shaky hands, she picked up the pen and signed her name. It was over. And yet, as I watched her slide the papers back to me, I realized there was no satisfaction. There was no rush of victory. No relief. Just emptiness. Emily let out a slow breath. Is this really it? I met her gaze. It was over the moment you chose him. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed the papers, stood up, and walked out of her life. I didn't look back. The silence after the storm. The day I walked out of that coffee shop, I thought I'd feel free. I thought there'd be some moment of clarity, a rush of relief that I was finally rid of Emily and everything she had done to me. But there was no moment. There was no victory. There was just silence. I drove home, locked the door behind me, and sat in the dark for a long time. I stared at the divorce papers sitting on my kitchen counter, the ink still fresh from where Emily had signed her name. It was officially over. So why did it feel like I had lost something I could never get back? I ran a hand down my face. My body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion I couldn't shake. I had been angry for so long. The rage had kept me moving, had given me a purpose. It was what got me through the sleepless nights, the quiet moments when I almost let myself break down. But now, the anger was gone. And all that was left was the emptiness. Adjusting to the new normal. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. Everywhere I turned, there were memories of Emily. I'd reach for a second coffee mug in the morning, only to remember I lived alone now. I'd hear the front door open at night and expect her to walk in, forgetting that it was just me. Even small things, like seeing her favorite wine at the grocery store, felt like tiny knives stabbing into my chest. The house was too quiet. Liam was with me half the time, but the other half? I didn't know what to do with myself. I tried everything to distract myself. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, stayed late at the office just so I wouldn't have to go home to an empty house. I started going to the gym more, lifting weights until my muscles burned. I even tried getting back into dating, just casual conversations on dating apps, but every time a woman smiled at me, I felt nothing. I was numb. People told me it would get better. That one day, I'd wake up and the pain would be gone. That I'd move on. But what they didn't tell me was that moving on doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces. Small moments where the hurt is a little less sharp. Days where you laugh, even if it's just for a second. Nights where you fall asleep without thinking about them. Moving on isn't a finish line you cross, it's 1,000 tiny steps you don't even realize you're taking. Liam's questions. The hardest part of the divorce wasn't losing Emily. It was explaining it to Liam. At 8 years old, he understood more than I wanted him to. He knew something had changed, knew that mommy and daddy weren't together anymore, but he didn't understand why. One night, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with wide, tired eyes. "Dad?" I ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, bud?" He hesitated. "Do you still love mommy?" The question gutted me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that love dies when trust is broken, that his mother had shattered everything we built. But Liam wasn't asking as a grown man. He was asking as a little boy who just wanted to understand why his family had fallen apart. So I gave him the only answer I could. I'll always care about Mommy, I said carefully. Because she gave me you. And you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, he whispered, "Do you think she still loves you?" I forced a small smile. "That doesn't really matter anymore, buddy." He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned on his side, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "I love you, Dad." I kissed his forehead. "I love you too, kid." And that was the moment I realized I was going to be okay. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day. Because Liam needed me to be. Running into Emily again. It was bound to happen eventually. A small town, shared custody, our paths were always going to cross. It happened at a school event. Liam's third grade class was doing a reading showcase, where parents came to listen to the kids read aloud. I sat in the back, watching him proudly read his story about a superhero dog. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting a few rows ahead, her eyes locked on Liam, a soft smile on her lips. For a split second, it was like nothing had changed. Like we were still a family. Then she turned her head, her gaze meeting mine. Everything came rushing back. The betrayal. The nights I spent alone. The way she had ruined everything. But you know what surprised me? The anger wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt nothing. She hesitated, then gave me a small nod. I nodded back. And that was it. No words. No lingering stares. No messy emotions. Just two people who used to love each other, now nothing more than strangers with shared memories. And for the first time since she shattered my world, I felt free. A new beginning. It took time. Long, painful nights. Small victories. Steps forward and steps backward. But one day, I woke up and realized Emily wasn't the first thing on my mind anymore. I started living again. Not just surviving, but actually living. I went out with friends, traveled to places I always wanted to see. I spent more time with Liam, making memories that were ours alone. And one day, I met someone new. It wasn't instant. It wasn't fireworks and love at first sight. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could love again. Because betrayal doesn't define you. Heartbreak doesn't destroy you. And no matter how much someone hurts you, you can always rebuild. You can always start again.